Thank you very much to Stevie Frederick for supporting me on Patreon, making this video possible. You too can support my channel by visiting the link in the description below. Welcome to this painting tutorial. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this video, and in this video we're going to paint an Intercesor Ultramarine Space Marine from the easy to build set of Warhammer 40k. I tried to keep it simple with few colors and very straightforward. In this video you will learn how to paint an Ultramarine very close to what you see in the artwork off the box. You can as well stop at any point you feel comfortable with your paint job, but I will show you where you could stop for tabletop standard too. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you like it, and maybe subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos in the future, and I will get started. I'm going to start by priming the model in blue. For that I'm going to use Macrage Blue spray from CITADEL. You can use any other primer that you like, but using this one applies a base coat and primes the model so that we can start painting, so it's a little bit quicker. Once it's done, I'm going to give it an extra coat of Macrage Blue. This is going to be a thin coat, and it's going to be mainly to unify the color to make it look uniform, and in case we make any mistakes we can come back with the same color and clean up without any differences between the primer color and the paint, which there aren't very evident, so you might want to skip this step if you want, but there will be inevitably some areas that you didn't hit with the primer, so you might want to paint them again with this color. The first thing that I'm going to paint is going to be the black, and for that I'm going to use Vallejo model color black. I'm going to paint the armor joints, the gun casing, and the leather around this marine, and mostly I'm going to use a fine detail brush to get into those recesses on those places in between the armor bits. And for the bigger parts you can use a bigger brush if you want. Just make sure not to paint in areas that are supposed to be blue at this point. You could also paint the leather in brown if you wanted, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it simple and keep it black, and also thin down all of the colors that you're going to use in this tutorial, just enough so that they flow and they don't create any problems, they don't cover detail, and you can apply them easily. Next I'm going to use Leadbelcher, and with this color I'm going to paint all of the areas that are going to be silver, most of the gun, some places in the backpack, and some tubings here and there on the armor, and that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of silver, but make sure to be careful in these areas not to paint on the areas that are supposed to be blue, because we're going to need to clean them up if you do, and that's it. Next I'm going to paint the gold areas around this model, and for that I'm going to choose Retributor Armor. You can use Balthasar Gold, but Balthasar Gold is a more brassy brown gold. Retributor Armor is a little bit more yellow and more shiny, and I want these Ultramarines to be like the poster boys, to be very shiny and very pristine, because they are the main Space Marines pretty much of all of the Space Marines, and I wanted them to look very bright, very clean, and very nice. Next I'm going to paint a couple more details on this Space Marine. I'm going to start with Screamer Pink, and with this color I'm going to paint the Purity Seal wax on this model. You could paint it red if you want, but I see them on the box art, they look a little bit more pinkish, so I'm going to use this color instead. To finish up blocking all of the colors on this model, we're going to paint the parchment, and for that I'm going to use Sandri Dust, and with this color I'm going to just paint the parchment area of this model. Don't forget to thin down all of these colors that you're using. Again, I'm repeating this too much, but assuming this is the first video you've ever seen of me doing, it's very important to thin down the paint so that it flows easily and doesn't create any brush marks or any crumbs of paint. Once that's done, all of the colors are painted on this Space Marine. I'm going to start shading with Dragonhof Nightshade, and with this color and a fine detail brush, I'm going to get into all of the cracks and crevices and try to line all of those edges to give it a shade or a shadow. You could shade the whole thing and then clean it up with Macrage Blue, the open areas, to bring back the color. But doing it this way, it's a little bit more quicker in the long run, and it's going to look very good. If you overdo it, you can use a little bit of Macrage Blue and clean up the area that you used a little bit too much wash on. But if you didn't, you'll see that you're gonna save a little bit more time cleaning up instead of shading the whole thing, but you can do it if you want to. Once it's done, you can see the model looks a lot more three-dimensional, and it's a little bit easier to see from a distance and to distinguish the shapes. I'm going to continue shading with Nuln Oil, and this is going to be an overall wash over the silver areas. Just the backpack and bolter pretty much, but if you see any other places that are going to be silver, like in the helmet, you can shade those areas completely. Just a small note, make sure to shake down all of the washes and paints that you're using on any miniatures that you're painting, because they tend to separate, and the finish and the look of the paint is going to be different depending on how well it's mixed, so that's very important. The last shade that I'm going to use is Agrax Earthshade, and this is going to go over all of the gold and the purity seal, and that's going to be it. At this point, whenever you finish applying this wash, that's good enough to put on the tabletop and look very good. As you can see, the model looks three-dimensional, looks good, it's all painted, and this is going to be a good tabletop standard to start playing. If you want to continue painting, you can continue to follow this tutorial. I'm going to go over all of the highlights on all of the places. You can take what you want and highlight on your miniatures, and you can leave whatever you don't feel necessary. Just don't do it. So we applied a shade. The other thing that we need to do to emphasize the three-dimensionality of the shapes is going to be a highlight. I'm going to start with Calgar Blue, and I'm going to do an edge highlight all over all of the edges of this model. If you see the box art on all of the boxes and even in the website, you can see those edges are highlighted with a very sharp, very small line of color. And for that, I'm going to start with Calgar Blue, and I'm going to go over all of these areas very carefully. It's going to be very easy to mess it up, so if you do any mistakes, you can clean up with Calgar Blue, and if you go into the recesses, you can clean up with a little bit of Drakenhof Nightshade and shade it down again. But just go patiently around the model and pick those prominent edges and pick them up so that they look a little bit more three-dimensional. This step takes a lot of time, but it's worth it because you can see it really brings out those shapes and it looks a lot more three-dimensional and a lot closer to what you see on the box. I'm going to continue highlighting with Fenrisian Grey, and this one is going to go over only the sharpest edges, the very top of those curved edges and the very corners wherever you see a point in the armor shapes. You can add a little bit of this highlight on those parts only and try to make an even thinner line if you can, and that's going to make it look even more three-dimensional. It's going to be an extreme highlight. Make sure to have thin paint. You can use drying retarders or some wet palette or something else to keep the paint wet. Clean out your brush every so often so that you don't have any dry paint on the tip of your brush, and that's going to help you a lot picking those edges. Once that's done, the armor is finished. I'm going to move on to highlight the black. For that, I'm going to use Eshin Grey, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the armor, just in the armor casing and in between the armor joints. This is going to be an easy step, but try to do it as thin as possible, because if you use too much gray on black, it's going to look more like gray rather than black, so keep it simple and be careful. For tabletop, I usually don't highlight black because I try to focus on the more important parts of the model, which would be the blue and the gold maybe. You can decide what parts for you are important, but if you want to bring the whole model into a very high level like you see in the box, you need to do these steps. Once that's done, we're going to continue highlighting the black with Dawnstone, and this is going to be an extreme highlight to the black. You need to do even thinner highlights on the very corners of those edges of the black, just like we did on the blue. And this is going to finish the effect of the black, and this is going to make it pop, and the shapes are going to look a lot more clearer from a distance, which is what we want, because on tiny miniatures, shapes get lost from a distance if they're painted the same color with no highlights. Once it's done, I'm going to start highlighting the silver. For that, I'm going to use Stormhost Silver. And this is going to go over the most prominent parts of the silver. I'm going to try to pick those edges mostly. Some areas you can get away with just painting a line on the top of it, such as the respirators of the helmet and places like that. Places that are curved pretty much, but in places that are sharp, try to pick those sharpest edges, and that's going to be it. Once that's done, we're making a lot of progress. I'm going to continue highlighting the gold with Auric Armor Gold, and this is going to go over the whole gold area, just leaving the deepest recesses on the previous color. So be very careful on those details like the aquila. I'm going to try to paint those feathers and those edges the best I can, but don't paint on those recesses. And if you find it difficult to paint on the chest piece, don't worry too much. If you can't reach it, you probably won't be able to see it over that bolter anyway. But if you really want to paint it, just don't glue together your model. You can keep the arms separate and paint them separately and then glue it at the end. I'm going to continue highlighting that gold to make it look very shiny and very nice. I'm going to use Stormhost Silver again, and this is going to go over just the sharpest edges of the model, the very tips of those wings, on those feathers of the wings, and on the very sharpest corners on the shoulder pads and places like that. I'm going to just touch it with a little glimpse of this very shiny silver, and it's going to make it look a lot more shiny. Next, I'm going to continue highlighting the parchment on the purity seal. For that, I'm going to use Ushabti Bone. This is going to go over the whole area, just leaving the deepest recesses on the previous color. And especially with very light colors like this, make sure to thin them down very well and to use it on thin coats, because if you try to do a very thick coat because it doesn't cover too well, you might end up making a mess. So just apply one coat. If it doesn't look very good, apply a second coat once it's dry. I'm going to finish up painting this parchment with a little bit of Screaming Skull, and this is going to go over all of the edges of the parchment and all of the folds here and there, just to make them pop and make them look sharper. This is just a thin edge highlight, and be very careful and thin it down and you'll be good. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to the wax on the purity seal. For that, I'm going to use Pink Horror, and this is going to be an edge highlight as well on all of the edges of the wax, and this is going to bring that pink color that looks very good. And that's going to be it, just one color for the wax. To finish this marine, we just need to paint those lenses on the helmet. I'm going to use Mephiston Red, and being very careful, because I'm not gonna lie, this is very difficult, and even for me, I mess up a lot many times, so we need to come back and clean up and do it again. So I'm going to do my best just to pick those lenses. Turning it upside down helps, and thin it down the color just a little bit so it flows a little bit easier, not too much so that it doesn't flow into those crevices. I'm going to just touch these lenses and try to paint them completely, and that's it. You can leave them like that, but I'm going to continue highlighting them with a little bit of Evil Sunz Scarlet, and this is going to go towards the front of the lens, just half of the lens area, leaving the half lens on the back part of the lens to be darker. Then it's going to be just a little dot on the very front of the lens with Fire Dragon Bright. This is a difficult step, but it's worth it to make this look like a fiery glow that progresses towards the back of the lens. Then to finish up this effect, I'm going to paint a little dot of white with Vallejo Model Color White, and just paint a little dot on the very back part of the lens to simulate a reflection of light, and this is going to make them look a little bit more like lenses. And this is the finished model. I have to say I had a lot of fun painting this model, and it looks very close to what you see on the box. In my opinion, it looks very good. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Blue is not a very difficult color to paint. It's actually, I think, one of the easiest ones. It covers very well, it looks very good, fastest. This color scheme doesn't have a lot of colors, so if you're going to do tabletop, this is going to go by quick. If you want to pick those edges and make them pop a lot more, I would recommend to do this on the very important characters, and you can do the whole army if you want, but it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to look awesome though, so maybe it's worth it. So thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and you found it entertaining and helpful, and that it's going to help you paint your Ultramarines. If you liked it, please like the video, comment on it, and subscribe to the channel to see more videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.